So I kind of wanted to move forward, well, I guess back in a way, and talk a bit about the Red Alert series. So I'm currently kind of working on a quite a big video covering that whole series. So
Hmm.
kind of like going back to the first one when it was originally being made for the soundtrack specifically. So you'd obviously come off the first Command and Conquer not too long before it. Did you have ideas on how you wanted to like distinguish the music in Red Alert to make it feel like its own?
Well, it was a collaborative effort in terms of trying to lock down the style of it because I kind of experimented with a few ideas in the beginning, um, just to kind of spitball some things. I didn't even know that Red Alert was going to be a prequel at first. I just knew that we were going to do another Command and Conquer after we did the first one and the covert operation. So my immediate assumption was that it was going to be a sequel and move it forward. I didn't get the memo yet that we were going to go back in time and do this whole other, alternative, fictional timeline thing. So before I even knew that, I had written Helmarch, and I had written that with the idea that maybe this would be a theme for Nod or something moving forward if it was going to be a sequel. And Brett Sperry came into my office, president of Westwood, and working closely on the game, and said, you've got anything new for me to listen to? And I'm like, yeah, I just wrote this kind of rockin' piece, and I think it's pretty cool. I think it might be a good, theme, for Nod or whatever. And so he's like, oh, let me hear it. So he listened to it, and he's like, oh my god, he's like, this is the theme song for the game. And I'm like, really? He's like, yeah. He's like, this fits perfectly. He's like, and it's not going to be Nod. It's not going to be GDI Nod thing. It's going to be Allies versus Soviet. It's going to be this alternative, you know, prequel timeline. And I'm like, oh, well, that's interesting. Okay, well, all right. So that one was already in the bag, and I didn't know what that meant moving forward because that just completely changed my perception of what I would do for the game if it's going to be going back in time to the World War II sort of era. And so it started making me think, well, what can I mess with that would be unique for that? And I was trying things like old B movie 50s score sounding stuff, and like even some like orchestrated, almost like disco dance kind of thing, or like I was just being crazy and just trying stuff to see what would stay. I did some like surfer music. I did like just wacky kind of stuff, and I was like mixing hip hop with like old B movie stuff, and so after doing that for a bit, just to kind of get some ideas and demos, none of them were really speaking to the game. They're like, ah, I don't know that fits. I don't know that fits. I don't know if that fits. You got this cool rock piece with the marching, but we don't want to necessarily go all rock. But let's not put it in necessarily into a time period. Just take what you've done with CNC, but make it kind of cater to the sides, or some personality for how this game plays. And I'm like, okay, well, that's interesting. And they thought that maybe doing more industrial-ish kind of stuff would be cool, or doing something to add personality to the factions, basically, and to the overall game. Just try to make a cohesive sound rather than split up sounds, or make it so regimented. Because Command and Conquer was very experimental too. It was kind of all over the place, and it was allowed to be, and that was kind of interesting about that. So yeah, Red Alert ultimately leaned in the industrial synthesizer and orchestral hybrid kind of thing, and that ended up working and setting it apart enough from Command and Conquer, but not pigeonholing it into a period piece. So I think that's ultimately was kind of the mode of thinking behind it.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, more generally speaking, though, this can be attributed to Red Alert. Like when you're making a score like that, how much of the game are you playing at the time? Like, are you really like into it, like figuring out like kind of the vibe of it, or are you going off just meetings or notes, or what's your kind of ideal?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. Because oftentimes I'll get design documents or just meet with part of the team to get a sense of what they're looking for. and then go do it. And other times I'll be able to play the game and and see how it's supposed to actually, function. And so then it'll give me ideas, like for example, when I was seeing the character of Tanya for the first time and how you can play with her on the map, and she's got this, snarky, badass, kind of vibe to her. She was like the answer to the commando from the previous one, and I was like, oh, what can I do that's fun for her? And I started off, kind of doing some kind of disco-y kind of thing for her that was, supposed to be like almost like spy theme, like fun James Bondy kind of thing. And it didn't really work as well as I thought it would when we tried it out. So that was another idea that kind of got scrapped. But um, in general, it wasn't really about character assignment as much as it was about, faction and gameplay. So I just tried to make a more cohesive soundtrack at the end of the day. But playing the game definitely helps, and I was really into playing them at the time because we had a blast. I mean, we would get new features in and try them out, and then we wouldn't stop playing. We would just, it'd be after hours, and we would be going home 8, 9 o'clock just because we're playing more matches, or or even later sometimes. It was, and we would be taunting each other over the intercom system of of Westwood at the time. Because we would be able to do like group calls, on the phone system, and so we would be playing team against team, and like, I found you hiding in the corner, you and go and kick his ass. It was funny.
It's all just game testing, just for testing for sure.
Yeah.
So I mean, because for that soundtrack, you won a couple of awards, right, for the Red Alert soundtrack. Like, 'cause at that point, you're still, at least compared to now, like, earlier on in your career, like, what was it like to win a couple of notable awards on that?
It was a surprise to me. I didn't think that what I was doing was necessarily um, going to be up for something like that. I just, to me, it was just like, I'm just trying to do some cool stuff that gets the adrenaline going when you're playing the game, and trying to, just work creatively with the team, and make something that we not only we think is fun, but we hope that is received well by the audience. And so the fact that I was up for any kind of award for it was a surprise, and very flattering. And I appreciated the acknowledgement. That was cool. I tend to just zone in my bubble and not think about that kind of stuff in general. Even today, like I still get my eyes open today to different things. Whether it's fan interaction or whatever, and it just reminds me, like, wow, video games really do have a lasting effect on people, and it's just as important and endearing to them as people are of bands and concerts or movies or whatever it is that you're passionate about. It's really a whole culture unto itself. And I think that's really awesome. The more that I have an opportunity to get out there and see that, it's a nice reminder to know that exists, and that there is that passionate base out there, and community out there. It was something I was very oblivious to in the early years. I had no idea. I just figured, oh, there's just a few diehards out there. Like, this can't be that big of a deal. But to my unexpected pleasure to find out that was actually not the case, and that it is a lot larger than I think it is.
I mean, the love for that kind of stuff, I think, is really apparent with like Red Alert 2, right? I always hear people say that's like their favorite game and also soundtrack, like from all the games that have ever existed.
I hear it from all sides. People have got their individual favorites across the whole series. But yeah, Red Alert 2 did get a lot of well received compliments and fan mails and articles and all of that. So I mean, again, it was another flattering thing to see happen. But like I said, to this day, everybody's got their different favorites, and I hear about them quite often. Hey, my favorite was Yuri's Revenge, or my favorite was Aftermath, or my favorite was Red Alert 2, CNC, the original. Nothing ever tops that. It's all over the place. Everybody's got their favorites.
I think it says a lot that every one of them can be someone's favorite, eh?
Yeah. To me, having seen it from the inside along the way, I mean, I've even gotten some favorites here and there of myself. Like, I I really enjoyed the games when the expansions came out even more, because I felt like they really did add something to them, especially like when we did Yuri's Revenge, actually, for Red Alert 2. That expansion really felt like a real, like, souped up, addition, that really enhanced, the overall gameplay. And I could say the same thing about Tiberian Sun. When Firestorm came out, I thought that really added a really cool component with, with the whole Cabal faction and all of that. So, there was some really inventive stuff, and we had some really creative designers and producers, and people just pushing the envelope. And that was one thing about, I give credit to Brett Sperry about, as the president, he was always very, pushing people to do something different or fresh or new, or, think outside the box a little bit more, and sometimes he would have, a vague way of saying that, and you'd have to try to understand or interpret for yourself what that meant. But ultimately, he just wanted to push things. And, after a while, I finally got it, what that meant. And it was, it's cool to have that kind of encouragement, because that means that your game's going to have more personality. It's going to stand out, and obviously stand the test of time. And it's living proof of those games.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I want to ask a little bit too about, say, Yuri's Revenge or any of the expansions, really. So, when you're scoring an expansion to a game that's already out, is the process for that any different? Do you kind of have maybe less creative freedom, or maybe even more creative freedom to kind of do something different?
um I was always encouraged to be creative and try things. So whether it came from Brett or Paul, my audio director, everyone was always very encouraging of that. Or anybody that I worked with, really, even different producers that were on different projects, they were always on board with, just what can we do that's cool, what's gonna just drive this home, or what's gonna add something more personable to it. And that was such a fun environment to work in, because as a composer, you don't get that from a lot of different companies. A lot of people want you to just copy something that they're referencing, or they just have a style in mind, and they just want you to stick to that style. And if it fits the game the best, then maybe that is the best decision. But I find that there's a wide variety of games today that lack variety. In their scores in particular, or a lot of it is just background and doesn't rely on a melody or a hook enough, or doesn't have the thing that stands out necessarily to draw you in. It's more just sort of ambient filler, or whatever the case may be. And I'm generalizing, of course. There's a lot of great stuff out there too, but the point is when composers get asked to do the same thing, or copy the same type of style, that's associated with Hollywood movies or whatever the case may be, then you get stuck in this more of the same thing. And then games don't necessarily have that wow factor as much as they might have in the past, because now it's just another version of this or another copy of that. So I always like to see different variety of music in games. And when I recognize something like that that's happened, I'm the first to acknowledge that and say, wow, that soundtrack was really cool. Or I really enjoyed this game experience, and because it did draw me in, and it did make me believe I was in that environment, or whatever. So that's part of what we do. Um, so I don't know if that answered everything. I might
Yeah.
have gotten off track a little bit.
No, that's just a pretty good idea. So I wanted to ask.
Oh, you're talking about it in relation to when I would, work on something, a new project. How would I make that different, or was I encouraged to make that different? And the answer is yes.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and I would try to find something about that game or that expansion that I could latch onto. Right. So an example, Firestorm. Because Cabal was an AI, I latched onto sounds that were from like modems and communication devices, and anything that I could sample and make rhythms out of, and make that part of his personality of the music, and make it very machine oriented and very robotic driven, or whatever. With Yuri's Revenge, I really tapped into the whole sci-fi B movie sound and mixed that with the contemporary sound of what I did in Red Alert 2. So it was rocking and still had the synthesizer and industrial thing going on, but then you had this, like, these old sampled, sounds from old B movies that were part of, sound libraries that I'd licensed, and bought to use, but come to find out later they were actually taken from legitimate old movies like that. And then I'd created music that sounded like orchestra music, but filtered it to make it sound old, like it was lifted off of an old vinyl record, or an old, recording that wasn't that great because it sounded like from an old movie or whatever. And I tried to make that part of the personality too, because it had that vibe to it to me. It really, exudes that sort of old school, like sci-fi B movie thing. But in a fun way for our game, and so that was part of that personality that I tried to add something new to that part of it, because I didn't use it so much in Red Alert to begin with. I figured, okay, this is the spot to use that. This is where it makes sense.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question about Helmarch. So obviously we've had three renditions, three versions over the years. With you did do the one in Red Alert 3, despite not being able to do a lot of the soundtrack.
Mm-hmm.
I want to ask, what's your favorite?
Oh man, I like them all because they're all different. But I got to go back to the original because that's where it all starts. And that was really the spark of the idea. And what just sort of flowed seamlessly for me. I mean, I've told the story before, but for people that haven't heard it, basically I wrote that song as soon as I woke up in the morning to go to work. Because as soon as I woke up, the first thing that popped into my head was, man, it'd be really cool to write a heavy, metal song to the sound of marching boots, like have that be the rhythm and the pace of the song. So as soon as I got in my truck and went to work, first thing I did was look through our sound effect libraries. I found, a marching sample, and I heard this guy yelling commands, and I was like, oh, that sounds kind of fun because it's actually in rhythm to the marching. So let me incorporate that into it. And then I picked up the guitar to start to play something to it. And literally the first thing that I played right off the bat is what I started playing, just instinctive. So it just flowed. I wrote the whole song that day, finished it, done. And it was like I said, it was just one of those things that it's a spark that happens as a creative person that we all get when we have idea, and then you run with that idea, and it just sort of keeps going until it's finished, and it's so quickly it goes right by, but you were just in that zone. And that's the way I can describe it. I was just in the zone, and finished it immediately, and it ended up being an iconic theme. Who knew? I had no idea.
I mean, each
I thought
one has become.
I thought it was a cool track, but I didn't know it would be like this, thing that would turn into Pokemon memes later in life.
They're all just so remembered now, aren't they? Every one, it's like the most well-known thing. Everyone's heard it. You can't plan for that kind of stuff.
When something like has the life that has had, it's really just kind of fun to watch how people find it or figure it out, or even if they don't even know what it's from, they're like, oh, this is like a meme now, a marching song to put to whatever has marching in it, right? So, oh, now it's for this country's army and that country's army, and Pokemon's walking down the road, and or for whatever anime thing, or people have used it for so many different funny things that it cracks me up every time I see them.
So before we wrap up here, because we've been going on for a while, it's completely off Red Alert, but I did want to ask you about Star Wars Empire at War, which is personally one of my favorite games ever. I played it so much as a kid. It's just really, really good. And that was obviously the first project of Petroglyph, right?
Yeah.
Just
first one out of the box. Yeah, that was amazing. It's definitely one of the best game development experiences of my whole career, and possibly my most favorite, because I'm a huge Star Wars fan, have been since my whole life, since I first discovered it. And what is meaningful to me about that is not just being expanding the imagination of a kid, which it is, but it's also about my first real big musical impact that I can remember. My parents were musicians, and I was around that from the beginning, so I knew what they did, and that was great. But when I first saw Star Wars, I knew nothing about it other than I had heard it was cool. And what is the first thing that happens when you see the movie? All you see is the big Star Wars logo that fades out, and then you start seeing scrolling text. So that's how the movie starts. Now, if there was silence during that, it would be pretty boring to watch, and you'd be like, "What am I watching? What is this?" Right? But instead, we hear John Williams' main theme come in powerfully and just immediately sucked me in. Just the music alone said, "Oh my God, this is already the coolest thing ever. I'm in." And I know nothing and have seen nothing yet. So that's the power of music. That's the power of it right then. And so I connected with that. Uh, I've studied John Williams' work through most of his movies, at least, and in most of his career. Uh, and he is just one of the greatest of all time because of the fact that he writes such memorable scores. It's not just about how it fits stylistically. It's about resonating with characters and overarching themes that all tie together, and you remember those things when you leave the theater, or when you finish watching the movie. You're humming that theme in your head because it's just that well composed. And so that was a clue to me early in my career. When I started wanting to write and compose music of myself, I said, this is the one of the bars to try to hit. Even though I wasn't necessarily always doing orchestra music, that was the thing that always stuck with me. So getting to work on a Star Wars title all those years later, being a fan of not just the music but all of the sound, like Ben Burt is equally just as much of a inspiration to me based on his sound design. All of those clever sounds that he came up with is so genius and so inventive. It's just beyond what I could have ever imagined as I learned about it. And so that was an inspiration to me to, how do I work with sound design and go field record and capture sound and then manipulate it, and how do I come up with something that's just unique, that fits a science fiction themed game or whatever. It's all inspiring to me. And so to get to work with his sounds firsthand was like I was a kid in a candy store. I'm just like, oh my God, that's the Falcon, that's the TIE Fighter, that's Chewie, that's my favorite. But I learned very quickly while working on this game that a lot of sound would actually need to be created by me, because we were doing new vehicles and new sounds that weren't part of canon or lore necessarily. Like TIE Fighter tanks. What is that supposed to sound like? It's got treads on it. It's not going to sound like a flying TIE Fighter, but how do I take that, spirit of that and figure out a way to make it cohesive and work within the sound palette that Star Wars is known for? Same thing with the music. I said, I'm a fan first and foremost. Anything that has to do with the films, John Williams' music has to be there. So I'm going to use that. But if there's any new place in the game that we haven't seen before, new planets or some general space battles, that aren't tied to any story plot or anything, that's where I can introduce music that I can write originally and just do it in the style of Williams and try to blend in. I want to make it sound like it fits in with the rest of his work and not try to stand out. And that was an important decision for me to abide by, because fan first, then do what you would want to hear as a gamer. And that's the approach I took. And working on that and Forces of Corruption, which followed, greatest 4 years of my life in game development.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, like you want to blend in, right? Like you don't want people to think that it doesn't sound like Star Wars. And I think it's it does a really good job in that.
And there's no need for me to put my stamp on something that is already so well established. You know what I mean? So that's why it was also important for me to not stand out and just blend in and just if I can convince the average person who's going to play this that they're just using all Star Wars music from the movies, then mission accomplished.
Yeah.
Like they don't need to know which ones I did, but the diehards will know because they're as familiar with it as I am. So they'll, that's a new theme, and as long as they're cool with it, I'm happy.
Yeah, definitely. So that pretty much wraps us up here. I did want to ask if you still had that the custom tag guitar still going. Is that still the go to? Yep, there it is. I know I did see it. Obviously used it at Magfest. So I'm like, I'm pretty sure it'll still be around. It was just a year ago, but
That's it's my guitar. It's my favorite. It was made for me, and so but it's not just for the crazy look of it. I mean, obviously it looks great on stage and all of that, but it generally sounds awesome. Genuinely sounds awesome. That's what I meant to say. It gets all the tones that I look for in all of the styles of music that I play and write. Feels amazing. So it's just yeah, it's a great axe. He also built a bass for me, and so I use that pretty much exclusively too. It's a 4 string, so if I ever need a 5 string, I've got a backup for that. Um, but yeah, it's I'm very fortunate to have great gear to be able to compose and perform with. And that goes for all of the instruments. I guess it's a unique situation. A lot of composers usually have one instrument they're focused on, and I play drums primarily, actually, and then guitar, bass, keys. I sing. Play a little bit of keyboards. And just the important thing is to have an understanding of the instruments, and even the ones that I don't play, to learn about how horns are played, how strings are played, woodwinds, all of that, because when you're writing for orchestras, you got to know that there's a fixed range for each instrument. You got to know things like how dynamics are applied, what is realistic for a live player to pull off, or what you're relying too much on your machines for samples and craziness that isn't natural. You got to think of all of that stuff. So yeah, it's I have fun being a multi-instrumentalist, because again, it's sort of like it goes back to something I said earlier in our conversation about having something else to focus on that helps keep you creative and fresh, and you don't get burnt out on just doing one thing, because it's easy to just do something to death and pound it in the head, and then by the time you're done, you're like, I don't even like what I did after spending all day on it. Where I could have taken breaks and gone and done other things and come back to it, and then had a fresher perspective on it and known better what I wanted to accomplish. And I do everything that way, even with composition. Just I'll have an idea, I'll get it out of my head, get it somewhat composed, and then stop, save it, go do something else, come back tomorrow. Oh, okay, now I know what I was going for with this, and then keep going. So everybody has different ways of working, but that's one way that seems to work well for me.
yeah, and I think a lot of people could attest to leaving something overnight, coming back in the morning, and then it'll just click. So
Yeah.
yeah.
It's especially when you have to constantly live up to deadlines and create X amount of content for whatever the ask is. It keeps everything in motion. And at Westwood, I mean, gosh, we cranked out so much content in so little time. It seems like I only ever had like a few months, it seems like, to really like do the bulk of the work. And I had to bounce between several projects. Oftentimes I'd be going back and forth between 2 or 3 completely different games. I'd be working on Command and Conquer, and then Lands of Lore, and then Blade Runner, all at the same time. And then they're all completely different styles of music. So talk about a jolt in the brain of, okay, I'm going from industrial rock to, completely medieval music to, synthesized, trying to live up to something Vangelis did, which is impossible. How am I going to accomplish this? So it was nutty.
Never a dull moment, though, I imagine.
Especially back then. Yeah. It really seemed that way. Nowadays, I kind of have a different grasp on things. I feel like I have, time management is something I'm really excellent with, in terms of knowing how long it takes me to do something, and what's in my wheelhouse more than something else, and being able to execute on that. So I feel like, no matter what I'm given, I'm able to really narrow that down to a science. And even though it's a creative thing, and you can never put a, a complete timestamp on what the process is of creativity, I feel like I've got a really good handle on that, in terms of knowing, even with some leeway, how long it will take me to do something, and what I can shelve for later and come back to, and draw from different ideas that I might already have in the bank that could apply to a new project. So that keeps things efficient for me.
Mm. Well, that's awesome, Frank. I've held you in here for just on an hour now, so like I really appreciate you sitting down and having a chat. It's been awesome.
Sure, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me, and yeah, it was a fun chat. Good to relive some old stuff there.
And I just wanted to say too, if people want to, because you do stuff outside of Petroglyph, right? You have your own solo stuff, and obviously you do some
Yeah, I
performances.
do. I do my own albums, and collaborate with different musicians for different things. So yeah, I'm working on an EP right now that I'm going to release fairly soon. Um, just during this whole lockdown quarantine thing, even though I'm still working full time from home, when I'm done with that, I'm sitting around the house going, okay, I can't go anywhere. So what else am I going to do? I'm going to pick up a guitar. I'm going to pick up the bass. I'm going to get behind my drums. I'm going to start making some fun stuff that I feel like doing at that time, just to, keep myself sane, for lack of a better word. But so that's been fun. I've also got a complete metal album in the works. I've had that in the works for a few years now, and it's been on and off, but I've been able to finish that in the final stages of getting that mastered, and that'll come out probably later in the year after CNC's out and all of that, because the focus right now is on the CNC remaster. So that's been largely what we're looking forward to getting out there. And again, just we're really excited about having worked on that, and bringing a really high quality version and complete version, and so much fun bonus stuff for the fans, and hopefully that will just keep the life of it going, and keep the community engaged, and take it from there.
Yeah, awesome, man. I'm really excited to play
Awesome, man. Well, yeah, maybe I'll see you online sometime.
it. Sounds good.
All
Thanks, man.
right.
Cheers.